We had some nice feedback regarding the study of my grandfather's works. I have been quoting my grandfather ever since I began teaching many years ago. And typically what I would do is I would take an idea or several ideas, a theme, and kind of speak about the topic, but not necessarily go through the book piece by piece, chapter by chapter. Now, to do that anyhow will be a lot of work because my grandfather is a very voluminous writer, and we could spend a decade studying a chapter or an essay a day and not finish it. That said, I thought it would be nice, especially as we are in the season of Shavuos, the season of the festival that marks the giving of the Torah. I thought it would be a good idea to go through a very interesting chapter where he lays out a Torah study regimen. What would be an ideal regimen for someone who really wants to study Torah properly and to have a comprehensive and broad overview of the different disciplines and domains of Torah study? In particular, he begins the chapter by highlighting the fact that the Talmud tells us in many different places, in many different ways, that the antidote, the way to foil, to thwart the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, is with Torah study. In fact, the only way to truly neutralize and reduce any risk of the Yetzer Hara, our sages tell us, is only via Torah study. And thus we can know if someone does not have Torah study, we know for sure there's no way for them to overcome, to defeat, to neutralize, to triumph over their Yetzer Hara. The Talmud tells us in many places that the Almighty said, I created the Yetzer Hara, I created the Torah as an antidote. There's the Yetzer Hara. This is the venom of the serpent, of the primordial serpent that causes us to make all sorts of blunders and mistakes and forget about God. The Yetzer Hara is the foreign god that seeks to lead us astray. We have that ailment, but we are also given the antidote. We are given the Torah. On the festival of Shavuos, we read in the Torah about the special offering that was brought once a year on the festival of Shavuos, and that is the Shtei HaLechem. It's a sort of bread meal offering that's brought exactly once a year. And unlike all other meal offerings brought in the temple, the Torah stresses that this one is made of chametz. It is of leavened bread. All other meal offerings, flour offerings, bread offerings, even the showbreads were all made of matzah, meaning not that it was made matzah, but the bread was kosher for Passover. The bread was not allowed to rise. There was no leaven in the bread. However, on Shavuos, the day that marks the giving of the Torah stresses that the Shtei HaLechem, that particular offering, is made out of chametz. And the commentaries explain that throughout our literature, the Yetzer Hara is emblematic or is symbolized by leaven. When the Talmud records the prayers of the sages, one of the prayers of one of the sages is that we want to do your will. But what's preventing us from doing your will? The Sa'ar Sheba'isa, the leaven in the dough. Commentators explain that's the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is symbolic, or the leaven is symbolic of the Yetzer Hara. And therefore it has no place in the Almighty's temple. The leaven is symbolic of the foreign god. You cannot bring anything that smacks of the foreign god to the Almighty's holy temple. It's just not compatible. Why? Because the foreign god is trying to get you to do sin. The foreign god is trying to get you to veer away, to veer astray from the path of God. It's just not acceptable in the temple. However, once we have Torah, Torah neutralizes any ill effects of the Yetzer Hara, and thus on Shavuos, the day that marks the Sinai revelation, when the Almighty began to give the Torah, the Almighty had the revelation at Sinai. That is the day when there's no problem to bring chametz into the temple, the Yetzer Hara is no longer a threat. The Rambam tells us very famously, there's only an illicit, inappropriate thought. It only arises in a heart devoid of wisdom, which is a way of saying that if you fill your heart up with Torah, with wisdom, with true wisdom, it'll banish all other intrusive thoughts. We know that there are 3 cardinal sins. There are three sins that you must forfeit your life to not transgress. We also know that there are 3 mitzvos upon which the world stands. It's the beginning of Pirkei Avos. Upon 3 things the world stands: ala Torah, ala avoda, v'al hagemilas chasadim. On Torah, on service of God, and on kindness. There are 3 things that you have to give up your life, the 3 cardinal sins, and they are idolatry, adultery, and murder. And they're the exact opposites of the 3 things that uphold the world. Service of God is the opposite of idolatry, which is service to a foreign god. Kindness is about giving. The most dreadful thing that you could take from a person is their life. Murder is the opposite of kindness. And Torah is the opposite of any illicit behavior, because Torah is the elevation of the mind. It's the purification of the mind, and that is the way to thwart, to foil. It's the antidote to the Yetzer Hara. If someone studies Torah, and nevertheless they have those intrusive thoughts, or, God forbid, they stumble on a certain sin, they can know for sure that their connection with Torah is not complete. Because if you have the antidote, you are not vulnerable to the ailment, to the malady. And the title of this chapter is The Antidote for the Yetzer Hara. How? How exactly is Torah the antidote to the Yetzer Hara? What do you need to do in Torah? What are the different disciplines and domains of Torah that you need to engage in order to be assured that you have the antidote fully deployed? And what he says is that there's 5 disciplines of Torah. Now, this is very interesting. For anyone that had the great privilege of spending time in yeshiva, and the yeshiva schedule is designed in a very interesting and unusual way, and this insight gives some understanding as to why it was thus designed. And what he does is he lays out the 5 different domains of Torah study to have the antidote fully deployed, and then he explains how to do each one of them. So not all of us have experience in these different types of domains of Torah study. I think nevertheless, if someone wants to broaden their exposure to Torah and to the different types of Torah, different disciplines of Torah, and wants to know how to do it, this chapter is essential. And he says there's 5 different domains in Torah that are needed. Number 1, Talmud on a deep level, which means Talmud is almost, effectively, it's infinitely deep. And the commentaries are absolutely voluminous. So there's one way to study Talmud, to study it and to go very deep, but to go a bit slower because you're seeing more of a deeper take on that particular piece of Talmud. The second is Talmud at a quicker pace. These are known as be'iyun, which means deeply, profound study, and betius, which means faster, to see more, to see not quite as deep, but to see a lot more material. The Talmud, it's so enormously vast. If you spend every single day studying a page of Talmud, which you're like, a page, that sounds very easy. It's very hard to read a page of Talmud, because each line is a whole intricate argument or a response, and it's incredibly dense and layered. You can't just read it fast. You try to read it fast, you're lost. To follow the calculations and the arguments and the questions and the answers and the proofs and the citations and the subtle logic. But if you're trained in the ways of Talmud study, and you have some experience, and you have maybe a teacher who's more experienced, you could do a page of Talmud a day. If you do it at that clip to finish all of Talmud, it'll take you more than 7 years. And that's studying the Talmud at a very superficial level. Study all of Talmud on a deep level, there are very, very few people who can or who have done that. So there's two disciplines. Study Talmud on a deep level, study Talmud on a more superficial level to cover more ground. And then there's something which is known as halacha. The study of halacha is not the study of the Talmud per se, but rather the conclusions of the Talmud as distilled by the halachic literature. Now, what does that mean? If you know all of Talmud backwards and forwards, well, then you could deduce from the Talmud what the practical halacha is, what the practical behavior of the Jew as governed by the Torah ought to be. But there's an entire body of literature, so entire libraries, effectively, of literature, which are dedicated to the study of the halacha as distilled from the Talmud. So you have, of course, the Rambam, and you have the Shulchan Aruch, which is the authoritative code, and that spawned an entire industry with thousands of books to actually explicate and organize all the words of halacha. That's a different discipline. So we have Talmud deeply, Talmud more superficially, but faster to see more of the Almighty's Torah. The study of halacha, the study of the written Torah. That means, of course, the Pentateuch, as we call it, the 5 books of Moshe, the Torah, but also the other works of Tanakh, of the Bible, of our Bible, the real one, 24 books. And finally, there's the study of Musar. Musar is the ethical lessons, how to improve your thinking, your character, your behavior, how to refine yourself, how to cleanse yourself of any character shortcomings, how to develop and hone and burnish your qualities, how to cleanse yourself from any character maladies. If a person is steeped in these 5 disciplines, and then he adds another thing. In addition to that, there's also prayer, which is needed for any venture. If a person has all those things, they are guaranteed to not be afflicted by the foreign god. That's the introduction to this chapter. And then he says, okay, well, let's learn how to do these things. How indeed do you study Talmud deeply, profoundly? Now again, the yeshiva students are doing this all day. And many of them don't really know what they're doing. They're just bumbling around. Why? Because they were never trained. There's an art. There's a science to know how to do it. And then there's shortcuts that can make you feel like you're doing it properly, but really you're missing out on the essence of what this form of study is. So let's go through one by one here. Limud Be'iyun, the study Be'iyun, the intensive and deep study. How do you do that? You have a page of Talmud. You have a subject that the Talmud is addressing. And you read the Talmud and it's very intricate. And one line, one word, it's a whole different approach. And what exactly was the question? And how exactly does the answer the question? This is how we're trained in the yeshiva. And you find this a lot. Like it's most pronounced, let's say, in politics, right? There's a debate and the person is asked the question and they answer a totally unrelated answer. And it bothers you because the question is not being addressed in the answer. And I always wonder, well, why does it work? If it wouldn't work, no one would do it. It must be that most people, or a sizable, a plurality of the voters or the people watching, the spectators, they're not trained enough to think, well, does this question actually answer the question? Or does this answer actually answer the question that was asked? Or is it a different subject? So to pinpoint exactly what the question is, and to pinpoint exactly how the answer answers the question, that something you have to train yourself to do. Because you can read the Talmud, oh, this is the question, this is the answer. Okay, we got it. Question, answer. Wait a minute. What are the assumptions in the questions? Which one of those assumptions was wrong? What new information was introduced in the answer that I didn't know as the questioner? The questioner and the answerer, questioner, which is some of the lingo that's used. The questioner is like the unnamed questioner. And the answerer, where exactly did their opinions part? Why did the questioner not know the answer that prompted them to make that question? If the answer is so obvious, well, why'd you ask the question? It can't be that you just missed something obvious, can it? The Talmud's going to record for us a question that's so patently, obviously answered by the answer? Where exactly do these two disagree? Where do they diverge? That's just the Talmud. On every standard page of Talmud, you have the commentary of Rashi on the inner margins. And Rashi is such a maestro. And everyone, whoever studies Rashi knows, like, it's unbelievable what he did. And every word is written with golden precision. Why does he explain what he explains? Why was it not obvious? What's he adding that it wouldn't have otherwise known? Why does he say it like this and not like that? I would have said it in a more simplified way. And I'm not smarter than him. Well, why did he say it like this? And you read the Talmud, you understand every part of the back and forth, every step in the dialogue, every step in the debate. And you open up Rashi, and then you go to Tosfos, which is on the outer margins of a standard book of Talmud. And you're seeing how the greatest minds of Talmud study, what they saw in this page. And if they saw something that differently than you saw, you have to realize, okay, where did I go wrong? And you're constantly adapting, adjusting, and pivoting, and trying to level up your understanding. Now, you'll very frequently find that a Tosfos commentary will begin by citing Rashi. The Tosfos are written by a collection of sages. Most of them were descendants and students of Rashi. So they have the book of Rashi, just like we do, and they have the Talmud just like we do, and they open up their commentary and they say, Rashi says this, and he is wrong for this and this reason. So now you are a fly on the wall on a debate between Rashi and Tosfos. Now, you can't take sides in that. You have to be a fool to say, well, oh, Rashi missed it. It can't be Rashi missed it. There's no way. Oh, Tosfos, they asked the wrong question. They didn't get it. The amount of hubris and arrogance you have to say that, it's outrageous. But also, these sages don't make those rudimentary mistakes. Your job now is to figure out what's happening beneath the surface. How is it possible that Rashi says this and Tosfos seems to have unimpeachable evidence that he's wrong? As if Tosfos cited a Talmud elsewhere that seems to completely refute what Rashi is saying. And Rashi knew that Talmud as well as Tosfos did. And yet he wrote what he wrote. So now you're being plumbed into the depths of the subject, and you're still on the page, by the way. You're still on the page. You look at the bookshelf, and there's libraries of literature. You haven't even left the page. You haven't even gone to the back, because every book of Talmud, standard book of Talmud, you have on the page, you have the text of the Talmud in the inside, and then on the outside, on the inner margins, you'll have Rashi, outer margins, you have Tosfos. You haven't even left that. If you go to the back, past the end of the book of Talmud, you'll see loads of other commentaries. The Rush and the Rif and the Ran, Nemutri Yosef. These are some names that may not sound familiar, but are the bread and butter of Torah study regimen in the yeshiva. The Maharsha and so on. You haven't left the page and you're already being plunged very deeply into a complex and subtle and nuanced discussion. Before you leave the page, you should already have a very strong foothold in what the essence of the deeper discussion on this particular page of Talmud, or this section in Talmud, is all about. Only then can you approach some of the other commentators with a specific focus on the earlier commentators. The commentators are broken down to the Rishonim, the earlier ones, and the Achronim, the later ones. And they did different things. They had different roles in their commentaries. You focus on the earlier commentators. So these are almost contemporaries with Rashi and Tosfos. Now what he writes over here, he gives some examples of which one of the Rishonim to speak to reference. The Rosh, the Ran, the Rashba, the Rambam. These are names that we may have heard before. What he's telling us is that there is, and he explicitly says this, but there is a desire to take shortcuts, to try to get to the heart of the subject without doing the hard work. If you read Talmud and try to go to the later commentaries, then it's like you're skipping steps and you're going to have enormous gaps, and you're not going to actually go through the exercise of studying the maestro Torah on a deep level. So you have the Talmud and you understand every step back and forth. You have the Rashi, the Tosfos, and now you've gone to some of the primary Rishonim, earlier commentators. And if you were successful in studying the Talmud properly when you were on the page, everything that you see off the page in the writings of these early commentators, you will see that they're talking about those same things. Now, if the discussions that they have are completely different than what you were having, you might have missed something. The greatest Talmudic minds who knew all of Torah backwards and forwards, when they studied this, they were discussing a different subject than you are. You might have missed something. Now, again, in one line, he's addressing so many problems that people have. Because we have books, very thick books, which are compilations of all the different commentators. So you have the book of Talmud, and you could have a compilation book, and you could open it up and start, flipping through and say, like, what do all the commentaries say about this? And then you read all the different commentators, and you get confused. It's just a big mishmash. Because you're not really understanding the subject, and you're just reading the words, and you'll fail to see all the nuances and the subtleties because you're not even understanding what the subject matter really is all about. And therefore, he advises, if you want to do this properly, don't jump too fast. Don't jump off the page before you're ready, and don't jump beyond those early commentators unless there's some point that you feel has not yet been addressed by what you've seen. Only then do you look at some of the other commentators to see if they address and expand on the subject that you found to be most intriguing in this particular study. Now, what if you have an insight? You find a nuance. You find a clever way to explain maybe what's really going behind the scenes. What's the backstage of the Talmudic analysis? And you have like a thread. It's like a little thread that you think can lead you towards maybe a deeper understanding. And maybe you're someone who can find a way to say a novelty, a new insight, a new approach, a new angle on this particular page in Talmud. And you want to examine, is this a subject that maybe has some merits to it? Then what you do, another way to kind of deepen your analysis, is many subjects in the Talmud are addressed in a few different places. So you have a subject that you're up to it in your study, but in 4 different places in the Talmud, the same subject arises, the same discussion or a similar discussion. One way to kind of expand your panoramic view of the subject at hand is to find those other places in the Talmud and to find what the Rishonim, the earlier sages, say about that particular subject, and see and compare and contrast and find maybe there is a way to develop and further your insight, your thread that you pulled out of the discussion. Now, if after a person already has a very strong foothold in all the earlier commentators, and they feel like the subject matter, like the topic at hand, is not fully clarified, only then do they begin to analyze the later commentators. Now, these are later commentators. And again, I understand some of these names may not ring their bell for you, but these are all household names in the yeshiva. Amongst the later commentators, you have different classes, meaning you have like the earlier later commentators. So I think 1700s, 1600s, 1700s. So they're officially later commentators, but they're the earlier later commentators. So he cites the Pnei Yeshua, Rabbi Kiva Eiger, Sosa Choshen, Nesivos. Again, these names might not mean much to you, but these are some of the bread and butter of the yeshiva regimen. That's where you begin, so to speak, in the next phase. And only after that do you go to the later versions of the later commentators. And then he explains, this is the bottom line, the primary toil in deep study of the Talmud is with the Talmud itself, with the Rashi commentator, with the Tosfos commentators, and with the primary Rishonim earlier commentators. And then he explains that if you open up some of the more modern contemporary books, it actually can limit how much you understand the subject at hand. Why? Because you're trying to understand the subject, and you could be pummeled by a fire hose of knowledge by someone who spent so much time and effort and insight to try to plumb to the depths of the subject. You'll find nothing for you, no area for you to understand or to even strive to understand. The goal of this sort of study is to use our mind and our intellect to understand the Talmud, understand it in a clear way, and to upgrade our intellect to the intellect of God, of Torah. This is a very important line. What's the purpose of studying this? I've told over before, the younger students, the Talmudic books that they select to study with the younger students are things that are more tangible. Like a lost item. You find a lost item, you have to return it, you have to announce it, you have to keep it, or are you allowed to keep it? What must you do with it, and so on, which is very tangible, very easy to understand. But the purpose of the study is to align our own mind with the mind of God. We start off as humans with human intellect. And the distance between us and, let's say, the angels in our understanding of existence is effectively infinite. The bargain of Torah is that it does not need to remain as such. It doesn't need to remain like that. We can upgrade our intellect and elevate our understanding and make our mind and our understanding of the world more and more compatible, more and more aligned with God's, with the Torah's. And therefore, if someone just plunges in and just sees the bottom line and doesn't go through all the stages of getting there, you may be dazzled. In fact, you probably will be dazzled by lots of insight and brilliance, but you're not going to be upgraded. You're not going to do that hard work that actually forms the goal of Torah to upgrade your mind. And then he adds a line. If someone does not do the work themselves, it's almost as if the path of ascent that is availed to them by Torah gets closed up. There's no way to ascend. Once someone finishes the study of a given sugya, the word sugya is the word for a topic in the Talmud, it's advisable for them to find their corresponding citations in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the bottom line, the code of Jewish law. And that way they'll know the halacha of a given subject, but also they'll also remember it. If you're fortunate enough to study the maestro Torah, and you know how much there is, and you spend a lot of time in it, it ends up one of the great challenges, not just the study, but the retention. Are you going to remember anything? You finished a whole semester. You studied a lot. How much of it do you remember? Because you finish one sugya, one section, you move into the next section, the next sugya. One of the ways to ensure that you will preserve an understanding, a knowledge of what you just studied, is to study the Shulchan Aruch, the bottom line of that particular sugya. This is his description of learning be'iyun, a deep, deep learning. A deep, which is a little bit slower, of course, but a deeper understanding of the Talmud. And then he tells us that this sort of study is a pathway to develop a serious and real connection with God. Now, the word that we use for a real, serious connection with God is known as yiras shamayim, fear of heaven. When the Rambam talks about our religious life, it falls under two categories: love of God, fear of God. These are the two emotions, the two goals of our religious life. And if something doesn't fall under either one of them, well, it's not part of our religious life. Certainly with respect to man and God, between man and God. Studying Torah in this way, in this manner, that is a gateway to developing a serious relationship with God, to developing fear of heaven. Someone once came to Rabbi Israel Salanter and told him about someone who studies Torah, but they only study it b'kiyos, which means fast. Cover a lot of ground, but don't go deeply. And Rabbi Israel Salanter was taken aback by that. He doesn't study deeply? How will he merit to have fear of heaven? Fear of heaven is a byproduct of this sort of Torah study. And then he ends off with the imperative of review. Review is always a problem because we don't get as excited with something that we've seen before as with something that we have never seen before. It's new, it's fresh, it's novel, it's exciting. So the Achilles heel of many yeshiva students and Torah scholars in general is they don't review. And the Talmud itself says that to study Torah, it's to plant. And to review it, it's to harvest. If someone plants and they don't harvest, what have they gained? What have they emerged with? What do they bring home? So if you study without review, it's like planting without harvesting. How exactly do you review? And how often ought you to review? So he brings a story. One of the Torah giants who was approaching old age, he wanted to develop mastery over one book of Talmud. Why? Because the Talmud gives a story about someone who died and had a near-death experience and came back and told his colleagues what he saw. One of the things that he says is that I heard, when I was dead in heaven, I heard, Ashrei Misha Balakan, praiseworthy is he who comes here, V'talmudo biyado, and his studies with him. There's this idea of taking something that's with you, that you have with you, you have it so securely, it can never be removed from you. And that for this reason, there is a custom amongst some people to find one book of Talmud that they know so well, it's always with them. And whenever you're alone, or whenever you have a few extra minutes, you can just review it because you know it by heart. You know what you know backwards and forwards. So this great sage, he's getting older, and he knows that his time here is not limitless. He wants to memorize. He wants to know one book of Talmud, let me know really well. So he selected a book of Talmud, and he reviewed it. He reviewed it many, many times. And then he tested himself. And to his dismay, he discovered that he doesn't quite know it as well as he thought he knew it. And he was very perturbed about that and said, well, maybe I got too old. Maybe my mind doesn't quite work like it used to work. And he was sad and depressed and despondent and forlorn. And in a fit of melancholy, he went to speak to one of the great sages. And he went to the yeshiva in Volozhin. And the head of Volozhin at the time was Rabbi Shapiro. And he told him what happened. I want to know one book of Talmud really, really, really well. I'll review it again and again so I know it really well. It's like mine. It's like I have it in my pocket. So the great rabbi, the head of the yeshiva in Volozhin, he heard and he started smiling. He says, why are you smiling? So he told him, he says, you told me that you reviewed this book of Talmud 15 times. Can you imagine the review of the Talmud 15 times, that book of Talmud? And you want to be an expert? By me, 15 times is the study. You haven't even reviewed it once. To study it is to study it 15 times. Once you get past 15 times, that's when you begin to review. So you haven't even started reviewing. You only studied it. This, of course, reinforces the imperative for review. I want to quickly go to the next section because I guess we'll have to do a part 2 on this. Again, the subject matter here is the 5 different disciplines of Torah study, that if a person has all 5 together with prayer, they are guaranteed to have what it takes to foil, to thwart the Yetzer Hara. They have the antidote to the Yetzer Hara fully administered. And the first one is to study Talmud be'iyun, deeply. What about to study Talmud bekios, which means to gain a broad understanding? If you are studying the Talmud deeply, isn't that the best? Isn't that ideal? You get to study it with the Rashi and the Tosfos and all the commentaries. Why is this type of study where you study it quickly, why is this a preferred method of Torah study? So he explains, in previous generations, in one semester, they would study 70 pages of Talmud deeply. And in our generation, unfortunately, people don't do as much. And in one semester, all they do is like 20 pages of Talmud. Now, this book was written in 1986, so 38 or 39 years ago. And what's really unfortunate is that in most yeshivas today, they don't even study 20 pages of Talmud in one semester deeply. It's more like 6, 8, 12, 15. 20 is like a lot. So people are kind of getting slower and slower. Maybe they're not studying as much. Maybe they're not as bright, or I don't know what it is. Maybe they're getting caught up in the weeds too much. But regardless, it's a well-known criticism of many in the yeshiva community that the study pace is just too slow. But regardless, if you're just studying deeply and all you have from a semester is 20 pages of Talmud, and there's 2,711 pages of Talmud, you just don't have enough exposure to enough of the Almighty's Torah. The Talmud is very often described as a sea, as an ocean. It's vast. It's deep. It's endless. And if all you're doing is covering just one little corner of it, it's wonderful. Every bit of Torah study is cherished, but you'll end up having just a small, pitiful grasp, foothold, exposure to the Almighty's holy Torah. And then he writes, no matter how much we try to encourage people to study faster, deeper and faster, it never works. And for that reason, there's the imperative of having a time dedicated to the study, b'kiyus, to the study fast to cover a lot of ground. It's basically the universal custom that in the morning section of a yeshiva schedule, you have, let's say, 4 hours of intensive study, going deeply. And then in the afternoon, you'll have 3 or 4 hours of doing b'kiyus, which is fast. Try to cover a lot of ground, a lot of pace. Now, how fast is fast? That, of course, is subjective. And what he writes is something that basically no one does. He writes, it's imperative to study a minimum of 1 page of Talmud per day. So if let's say you do that 5 days a week, not including Shabbos or Sunday, Shabbos, Friday or Shabbos. Sunday's a regular day in the yeshiva. Friday, people preparing for Shabbos. A lot of people review on Shabbos that they did the whole week. But if you do 5 pages of Talmud a week, well, that's already 20 pages a month. And then if you have a 5-6 month semester, you could do 100 pages, 120 pages. You can finish a whole book of Talmud. That's the way to do it. So a minimum of 1 page of Talmud every day. And if you're capable of it, do it with Rashi and Tosfos. If you're not capable of it, do it just with Rashi. And I've found, I know when I started getting serious about Torah study, Wolbies, we're told, are late bloomers. You get serious about it. Like I was outmatched and outclassed by some of my peers in the yeshiva. After high school, really after 11th grade, I went to yeshiva in Israel. And I had the privilege of being in a small boutique yeshiva, but a yeshiva that my grandfather, blessed memory, he declared this is the best yeshiva in the world. And it's an Israeli yeshiva. So Israelis are more intense about everything, as you know. They're just intense. So I'm like an American high school kid. You go to Israel, you go to yeshiva in Israel, and these students have been studying seriously like their whole life. And I spent a lot of time, following the Mets, which is a painful chapter on its own right. So you get there and they're just way better at it than you. You're studying Talmud with all your study partners and they're just better at it than you. Not necessarily because they're more intelligent per se, they just have a lot more reps than you. So one of the things that I did is I studied a page of Talmud a day with my study partner in the afternoon. And what you end up discovering is that you learn the lingo. You see the format. Some of the themes and the ideas and the methodologies repeat themselves. And you start to get more of an understanding in the inner workings of how Talmudic logic is organized and how Talmudic arguments are formulated. And then it just trains you to know how to study. If you are going even slowly, or slowly, even when you're supposed to go fast, you end up not having any that exposure to the length and the breadth of the Talmud. 1 page a day, if you do it with Tosfos, great. If not, then not. And you should finish the book of Talmud studied in the yeshiva. If you're meritorious, to be in the yeshiva. They're studying Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Baba Basra, Kiddushin, Subas, Yivamis, whatever it is. Finish the book. If someone is only studying deeply, intensely, they'll have a very hard time finishing one page of Talmud every day. Because you're so used to going into the back and forth and the questions and the answers, and you get caught up in the nitty-gritty, which is encouraged. But when you switch, it's afternoon time, you got to put on a different hat. Now we try to cover it, not to follow every thread. It's not the morning, it's not the Iyun part of the day. You have to train yourself to find the beauty and to experience the pleasure of studying a whole page of Talmud. And every day you're amassing more knowledge, more understanding, more of a picture, more of a visual understanding of the book and of the Almighty's holy Torah. And this knowledge, when your head is full of more Torah, it actually expands your mind. And many people, their portals of wisdom on a deep level are opened up by their exposure to large and large masses, corpuses of Torah. And actually, the study of Torah B'tiyus, fast, covering a lot of ground, higher pace, will open up avenues and train you to go to the depths in the other part of the day when you're studying Be'iyun. And then he adds, you finish a book, a page of Talmud every day, review it 4 times on that day and the following day. It's not clear if he means 4 times in total, or 4 times today, 4 times tomorrow, because that would be a total of 9 times. 1 time to study it and 9 times and 8 times to review it. If you do that, you are golden. So again, we're reading the 9th chapter, which is in the 2nd section of the first part 1, section 2, chapter 9. The title of the chapter is An Antidote to the Yetzer Hara, to the Inclination. How? What do you need to do? How must you deploy the Torah as an antidote to the Yetzer Hara? We discovered there's 5 disciplines of Torah, the study of Talmud, Be'iyun and B'tiyus deeply and on a more quickened pace, Halacha, the Torah Shebachsav, the written Torah, and Musar. We've done 2 of them today. We've learned how to, what's the means by which, or what's the methodology, what's the way to do it, to study B'tiyus and Be'iyun. And what can I say? Just reading this reminds me of the halcyon days back in the yeshiva. I remember when I was in yeshiva, and it's a lot of hard work. It's hard work to be there. It's a full day of study. And that's just one day. And like you do it, you feel like you climbed the mountain. You got to do it again tomorrow. And the next day. You have to be cut from a special cloth to be able to do it. But someone once told me, he's like, when you're going to get older, you're going to get married, you're going to have a family, you're going to get busy with life, and you're going to miss it. You're going to miss the opportunity to be in the yeshiva, have no responsibilities, to be able to study. You want to study till 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever you want. You can just do whatever you want. The whole world's available to you. And I said, yeah, right. I'm going to miss this. But I think that person is right. Because you read this and think about just the opportunity to gobble up the Almighty's holy Torah and to be elevated and transformed through that. It really is a great privilege. But that does not absolve any one of us from doing whatever we can in whatever situation we are in life to study the Almighty's Torah in all its different domains and disciplines. And please, next time we'll study the 3 other ways or disciplines of Torah study to round out the full deployment of Torah so that it serves as an antidote to our enemy that wants to torpedo our success in life. The Almighty created the Yetzer Hara. He created the Torah as its antidote. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions and your comments and your feedback.